right, guys, we've made it this far. I promise I'm not going to keep you from beer and food longer than necessary. I definitely, can we actually hear for the sponsors? I want to thank the sponsors who put together this conference, because without them, I know how much you guys drink, and your bar tab is never cheap. So, yeah. This is the time where, most people come to conferences for any number of reasons, to learn things, sometimes technical, sometimes to be inspired, sometimes to be uplifted. I'm here to scare the ever-living crap out of you, all right? So, as we mentioned, I'm actually with a company called Thunderbolt Labs. We do all sorts of bizarre technical things that go from hardware to machine learning to large-scale systems. Yeah, you name it, we've probably tried it. If you actually have real hard technical problems, come talk to us at some point in time. And I want to sort of put a fundamental question, right? As software developers and people who are technologists, we always have this question of why do we do what we do? I mean, aside from the fact that Vim is an abomination in the eyes of man and God, and Emacs is the one true editor to rule them all. Thank you. So exactly, there's this existential question of why are we here, right? We are here to actually have some scary thoughts, but the first thing we're going to do is interactive. We're going to explain why we're here. Because right now, all of you are VCs. You're venture capitalists, every single one of you right now. You are the latest people and the investors in something called Shillcoin, the latest thing that is actually going to otherwise support and fund any number of applications that you will bring to market using the power of a blockchain. You with me? Yes. Somebody was there before the split on Ethereum. All right, so your first choice to invest in is Lyre. Lyre is an application that allows you to otherwise create facts on the fly no matter when you want to need them. You can actually use Lyre to win any argument, anytime, any place, right? Your second choice, Elector. Why leave democracy to chance? And if you aren't laughing or you aren't crying, you haven't been paying attention to the last 3 years. As an American, I feel this very deeply. You might have heard about one of our other previous commanders-in-chief. Be that as it may, right? So this is your second choice, Elector. We can control democracies. Or how about Convictor? I don't know if you know this. In America, we run a lot of for-profit prisons. I did not stutter. For-profit prisons, right? So why should we actually bother with due process? That's very expensive. It takes a long time, and I mean, it's never really as cool as Law and Order. It doesn't finish in 60 minutes with somebody like screaming and breaking down on the stand, right? So maybe we should do this one. Or how about Tormentor? In Tormentor, what we do is we bring your loved ones back from the dead for a fee. So what do we fund? All right, call it out. Like, this is the interactive portion. Tormentor, bringing back from the dead. What's that? Lyre. Okay, we want people who are Lyre. So, anybody else? Anybody else? Nobody wants to actually, destroy democracy? Really? You people in the EU, functioning democracies. Trick question, because we're going to fund them all. Right? This is VC. We're rolling with Shillcoin, baby. We got it all. So Elector, has anybody heard of Cambridge Analytica? Small little firm, kind of destroyed my country for a couple of years. Right? How about this? We currently have AI deepfakes that are going out and actually impacting elections. And I believe there's an election going on, I think, in Argentina right now that has been impacted by this additionally. Right? How about this? Has anybody heard about the kidnapping scam with AI deepfakes? They're cloning people, calling them up saying, Mom, I've been kidnapped, send $1 million Bitcoin, or Shillcoin, frankly, to this address right now, or they're going to behead me, that sort of thing. This is going on right now, right? Or how about this one? On TikTok, people are currently taking some of the most famous child murders and retelling them that story, but in the dead kid's voice. Yeah. See, like I said, we're not here to make you guys feel good. Or, as it turns out, people actually are using facial recognition systems. Now, just as an aside, how many people here are aware of the accuracy problems with facial recognition systems with people of color, women, anybody who actually doesn't quite fit in? Or how about this? Has anybody ever gone through security in an airport and actually basically had to suffer one of those awful pat-downs as it doesn't figure out? Because, you don't fit into one of those nicely defined categories? We are currently using this technology in legal concepts in the United States where people have been convicted and then not been able to challenge that conviction because the software is considered proprietary and they have no standing. So people have been deprived of their liberty over software. Think about that. How about this? If Clippy told you you're going to jail today, would you basically be happy about it? Looks like you're suffering a jail sentence, right? And then I'm sure everybody's seen, has anybody here actually been living under a rock and hasn't seen an AI-generated image? Right? One of my favorites when researching for this talk was Waifu Labs. It's real, look it up, just on a VPN. However, we're going to rebrand Liar right now. Some of you hang out in the dark parts of the internet. If you're laughing at this, we're going to call this Trigger now, because right now, you can get the edgelord imagery you need with just a click, right? This is actually, so how many people remember Microsoft Tay? You know, the bot that went racist in 12 hours, right? Microsoft apparently learns nothing because Bing was creating images like this, right, within about 24 hours because the Chans basically took it over. And some of the other ones, trust me, legally I could not show them to you in Germany. You can guess what the content was, all right? So, guy who wrote a little bit about cyberpunk, William Gibson, you might have, seen Keanu in one of his worst movies ever. But be that as it may, future is already here. It's not evenly distributed. And if you think about what people are looking at, this distribution is becoming less and less even. And the power that are being distributed by these tools is going to the hands of fewer and fewer people, right? So the TLDR is, if you haven't been panicking, you probably should, right? This is I usually don't like word salad slides, but this is a very important one for us to read, and I'll give you the quote from this. All else being equal, not many people would prefer to destroy the world. If our extinction proceeds slowly enough to allow a moment of horrified realization, the doers of the deed will likely be quite taken aback on realizing that they have actually destroyed the world. Everybody, what? Nobody's laughing? Oh, wait, I'm sorry. That's not the end. This is the end. Therefore, I suggest if the earth is destroyed, it will probably be by mistake. Right? Nobody screaming it's a trap. Nobody bagging womp rats in the canyon. When the world blows up, it'll probably be by accident. And this is actually from a researcher from the machine, from a paper called Cognitive Biases Potentially Affecting Judgment of Global Risks. And it talks about how we currently lack effective mental models for calculating unknown existential risk, which is a big way of saying that that dude who thought the auto drive in his Tesla was working was real happy until the car went under the truck, right? We don't understand the actual implications of technology until sometimes it is far too late and that technology has proliferated or gotten out of control, right? As an example of this, how many people remember a little movie, How many people are actually here because of war games? I know I am. I bought a 300 baud modem and it was all over since then, right? So, by the way, we used to actually call other computers, anyway, it's a thing. This is what we're talking about. An existential threat. And we have sort of gotten away from that because we haven't lived under the specter of something like atomic annihilation like people did in the 50s and 60s, right? We haven't lived with these types of threats in a very long time because, frankly, we've had one of the largest periods of prosperity and growth and peace that the world has seen in the last 100 years, right? I know, which is terrifying to think about. So, to talk about some things that are wrong with tech. AirTags. Full disclosure, I used to work for Apple, don't anymore, but how many people have an AirTag because they lose their crap all the time? I do as well, right? They're amazing. Apple designed AirTags to be stalker-proof, right? They're doing things like upending the airline industry because it's really fun to see on Twitter when people are like, you're lying to me, my bag is at Heathrow, right? I think we've all been there. But then again, they've also allowed and made intimate partner violence casually easy. But I know what you're saying. That's just one. There are other things we could do. How about this? As it turns out, there is a new area called grief tech, where they're using photographs and memories of people who have passed on to help people process that grief, because especially if you lose somebody suddenly, it can be a real challenge to cope with that in your life. And they're trying to use that technology to provide a simulacrum of that individual so that that person can work through their grief in their own time and at their own pace. Awesome, right? How about this one? I actually just found about this today, which is really telling, seeing as I used to work at the company. But you can actually train your new iPhone with your own voice, right? But then again, since I can train a new voice with 30 minutes or an hour of voice samples, it means I can also do things like this, right? Any people like cinema here? Any people like movies? Okay. How many people have seen like The Irishman or the new Indiana Jones and we're kind of a little weirded out? Or even how about this? If you've seen the Star Wars, we don't like to talk about them, but Carrie Fisher, right? The de-aging that you can currently do, the fact that we can sort of bring actors who might have passed on for whatever reason back to the film to complete a role that they were in, right? Well, how many of you have heard about this use of de-aging? So what happens when you de-age porn? And we all know about the volume of video that's pornographic material on the internet, right? Well, as it turns out, when you de-age porn, you make artificial kiddie porn. That's the same technology. We're all feeling a little creeped out now, aren't we? Should be. The key point for everything that we're talking about is these are what are called both oftentimes in legal and export documents, but dual-use technologies. So in other words, it's a hammer. With a hammer, I can build you a house, or with a hammer, I can chase you down into the kitchen and then hit you in the head because you drank my milkshake, right? Okay, some of you aren't cinemaphiles. One of the biggest proponents of the surprises of dual-use technologies was Albert Einstein. With the other people at the Institute for Advanced Studies at Princeton, there are a lot of people who, did anybody here actually sit through Oppenheimer? Did anybody actually do Barbenheimer? Wow, we actually do have some sadists and some masochists in the crowd. So they created the atomic bomb with the not understanding necessarily what the implications of that were. And this is exactly what we mean by calculating an existential risk. Nobody knew what the world after the bomb was going to be like, but they blew it up anyway. Albert Einstein spent most of his life after working on the Manhattan Project, after writing saying that we should build this bomb, trying to undo what he did, arguing against proliferation, and basically, I won't say regretting, but depending on how you want to look at it, not truly understanding the implications of what it would mean when you could give one person a bomb and have them kill 100,000 or 200,000 or even 1 million people. Remember, we created the term megadeath to describe how an atomic weapon kills people because we're too lazy to write 10 to the 6 next to the body count. That means technology has consequences. We are technologists. Everything you do has a consequence, and oftentimes those consequences are hidden from you or might not even be foreseeable because we just didn't know. Right? So any Rebus fans can laugh at this one. AI is currently projected to cause massive underemployment. Anybody here pissed off that their favorite show is now on hiatus because the next season's going to be like 2 years out? Hollywood, it's on strike. Does anybody know what they're mostly on strike about? Right, the use of AI. The fact that instead of hiring 10 writers for a show, I can hire 2. The fact that instead of hiring 3 artists, I can hire 1. Or I can hire 1 temporarily, fire them, then just let the AI generate the rest of the production art. Right? I think there was a talk somebody might have given, we probably sat in talking about the implications of training these models, right? The implications of what does it mean to have a green model or an ecologically responsible mindset when we're starting to train these things. There are plenty of papers that talk about this, but anybody here use a GPU setup or something like that to train models at scale? Right? Okay, shamefacedly raising the hand. It's okay. We're not going to call you out too much. But think about this. Someplace there is an entire data center of GPUs and NVIDIA cards that are just running, churning and churning and churning and churning and churning and churning to make sure Mickey Mouse gets just right at the angle that she's going into those buildings. I don't know if that's the best use of, 50, 60,000 pounds of carbon, but what do I know? How about this one? One of my personal favorites. Right? This is kind of cool because it means that even ransomware gangs have a heart, right? They're like, hey guys, didn't mean to prevent those surgeries for those sick kids. Here's a free decryptor on us. The rest of you guys, screw y'all. But these are real implications, and I don't know if you've actually seen some of this. There are surgeries that have been delayed because of ransomware. There are people who actually who have not been able to get access to healthcare because the healthcare system was impacted or shut down, right? When this happens, they can't get the drugs out of the lockers. They can't actually get the schedule for what needs to happen. So these were all things that were done by technology. And it's really funny. I don't know if anybody's read about these ransomware gangs. It's more like a corporate environment. They go to work in cubicles. They sit down. They're like, what are you working on today? We're going to lock up about 6 or 7 corporations in America. I'd love to go to the pub with you guys afterwards, but I've got a hospital to lock up. I think they're about to break. They're going to send us some shill coin later. So it makes me wonder about that as technologists, as we start to see the implications of our work, at what point do we start to incur moral injury, right? And moral injury is basically about the psychological harm that comes from seeing your work. Oftentimes people who are soldiers have moral injury, police officers have moral injury, but the original source of this were nurses, who are oftentimes on the front lines making life or death decisions. They're forced to make the decision of whether that person will obtain care, triage. These nurses do that day in, day out, and it basically takes a massive mental toll on their psyche. And I'm wondering, as technologists, are we headed towards this being the state of what it means to be a software developer? Is this what it means to be a person who builds systems for a living, right? We're building tools like NX. That's going to make it easier to run machine learning at scale for cheaper. Well, that means I'm going to tell you, those gangs that are de-aging pornography out there, if there's a great tool that makes it easier, they're going to use it. So, certainly, I wouldn't depress all of you like this and then send you to go drink massively on with an open bar without offering solutions, right? Some of you know me, so you know where this is going. The first thing we're going to say is, well, how about self-regulation? Tech industry is all about that. Hey, trust us. We'll self-regulate. We can do this. Who remembers Google's first motto? Does anybody know what the motto is currently? Don't be that evil. All apologies to Spike Lee, it is do the right thing. For whom?
For the shareholders.
Exactly, for the shareholders. For the people who have currently bought into the shill chain, right? Do the right thing for whom? There was actually a small revolt internally at Google when they started to host essentially what amounted to the imagery for the kill chain that America was running in the global war on terror, right? I don't know whatever actually happened with that project, whether they ended up doing it or not, but there was internally, there were people at Google who are like, we do not want to work on this, probably because they're concerned about moral injury, right? Self-regulation. We can trust these tech overlords to rule everything, right? Anybody know about this little kerfluffle? I think large language models might be a little dangerous. So they, of course, fire her and then bring you Bard. So I get it. Self-regulation is out. Not a problem. We can get the government to regulate that. You're over 40. You are laughing. Thank God somebody recognizes what this is. Yeah, exactly. Regulators mount up. It's more than a Warren G song, folks. I'm going to take you back to ancient history, 2008. Anybody remember what happened then? How about this? Did anybody own a home in the past decade? Did anybody lose a home? All right, subprime mortgage crisis. America, we did some stuff with some people on Wall Street who were bankers, who were also supposed to be regulated, that resulted in a global financial meltdown, right? We, of course, in America created something called the Dodd-Frank Act that said, we are never going to do this again, because as it turns out, jacking up the economy of the world is bad for everyone. Who knew? Well, as it turns out, this little thing here is not actually a short code. This is part of the regulation that undid most of the stuff in Dodd-Frank that was sort of passed through on kind of like, don't pay no attention to the man behind the counter or man behind the curtain. This was actually one of the people who was talking about bank runs. He's a well-respected economist and a well-respected professor of public policy. And he was basically said, hey, more or less, don't do this, you dum-dums. So that brings us up to 2023. Anybody here work in a venture-backed startup? Some of us do. Oh, almost everybody here has real jobs. Okay. In America, we were pretty unhappy because Silicon Valley Bank, which was kind of the banker to all of these startups that you've heard of, collapsed. I don't know if we're old enough to remember this one. Enron, smartest guys in the room, Ken Lay, more American hubris. Right? I get it. Oh, I get it. This is the smug EU part, right? You guys have regulations and good regulators, don't you? Fine, fine. Oh, wait. UBS was fined $1.5 billion for basically rigging the rate banks use to lend each other money. Point taken. Point taken. It's not in Europe. Good point. But these guys are. Entschuldigen, mein Herr. Does anybody not know Wirecard? It's the most American thing Germans have done for a long time. Right? Wirecard turned out to be a massive fraud. It was kind of like the roll-up of eBay, Amazon, and a bunch of companies all into one. It turned out to be a massive fraud on the order, I think, of 6 or maybe about 6 billion euros, 5 something, whatever billion euros that went to $0 because of accounting irregularities and a bunch of fraud, right? So which brings up another concept when we're looking for these types of solutions, and is moral hazard. Long story is this. Moral hazard means that when you've got really great car insurance, you're going to drive 100 miles an hour. And so far, the people who are supposed to be regulating these industries are pretty much giving them car insurance for free. At least, especially in America, we bail them out continuously, right? And has anybody here ever worked a corporate gig where the dude who's running the dev team knows nothing, and no matter how much you try and get them to do the right thing, it's just not going to happen? Turns out there's a word for that. Moral distress, right? This refers to a condition under which the system itself fights against individuals attempting to do the right thing. So oftentimes, individual action is not enough, right? We've been there. Everybody, I think, has been a member of some team where you know what the right thing to do is. Everybody knows what the right thing to do is. And there's this moment of collective madness as the right thing still doesn't happen. This is fine. Anybody know who this is? Yeah, we're pretty, wow, okay. Almost nobody knows this. Correct, Hippocrates, Hippocratic Oath. We've all heard this, yes? This is a version of the Hippocratic Oath that's given and has been used by people who are in the medical profession about the tenets under which they will provide treatment, right? We are part of the society on which we're having an effect, right? As much as we like to sit there and have our sort of esoteric arguments, whether it's Emacs or Vim, whether it's Haskell or Erlang or functional languages, not functional language, or whether or not we actually should be using TypeScript, we shouldn't. The question is, I actually have for this group is, What responsibility do we bear for the unintentional consequences and those who are affected by the systems that we build, the tools that we build, the hammers that we publish freely as open source software? I don't know. I don't have any easy answers for this group. I don't have any easy answers at all, because the more you dig into the research, the more you look at the system seems to be biased, pun intended, against providing those tools and levers where we can actually affect the outcome in a way that drifts towards what we would probably call a morally correct outcome, right? At least for a free society, right? So where did all this stuff come from? This is cognitive biases potentially affecting judgment and global risk. The Machine Intelligence Research Institute. Great paper because it talks about essentially how most economic models are wrong. I don't know if anybody actually reads about behavioral economics. Kahneman and Tversky, Thinking Fast and Slow. Turns out Adam Smith and the model of economics was proven wrong by a bunch of guys. They eventually got the Nobel Prize for it because I'm sure you guys will all be shocked. People do not behave rationally. When a perfectly rational trader goes into an open market, he actually purchases the stock at a price. Yeah, which is why GameStop went to the price it did, right? Artificial intelligence has a positive and negative factor in global risk, which is a big fancy way of saying, oh God, I think artificial intelligence might be worse than atom bombs, nanotechnology, chemical weapons, and everything all rolled into one. And a 30-year-old Twinkie, right? Sam Altman is kind of famous for also talking about the existential risk, saying we should start regulating AI as the same way we do atomic weapons. I think Google's in on that too. I actually think that's because they were able to build their AI before it was regulated, but I'm a cynic if you guys didn't know that already, right? Quote from that paper. By far the greatest danger of artificial intelligence is that people conclude too early they understand it. Right? Right now, large-scale models and AIs are one of the closest things we have to aliens, because the decisions they make and the way that they work is completely inscrutable to almost everybody. If I gave you a vector of 1 billion parameters of ones and zeros and floating point numbers and said, there's your answer, that's why I did it. Like, what does it truly mean for us to understand what our AIs are doing, and more importantly, the decisions that they're making? Which is fine as long as you're just drawing Mickey Mouse flying into a building, but what happens when they're determining whether or not that missile goes off the rack, or whether or not that person gets treatment, or whether or not that person goes to jail, right? I don't know if there are any Taleb fans in the audience, but this is a great book that makes an argument that highly improbable events have done more to influence the world than the probable ones. It's worth a read. There's actually a lot of academic research that's going into this. This is a great paper from basically by some legal scholars who are talking about fairness, accountability, and transparency and ethics. These are essentially showing that they've been able to show that oftentimes small perturbations in models result in massively disproportionate outcomes, and they violate what people believe of or think of as being fair. Like, an example of this is, imagine you're going to your favorite coffee shop, you buy a latte, one person arrives at 10, they pay $7. You arrive at 10:01, you pay $70. It violates the innate sense of fairness. And as it turns out, a lot of automated systems that we actually have and have deployed do this on the regular. In America, we actually have something called redlining, where historically people of color and people who are underrepresented in incomes were not given mortgages. Well, guess what happens when you train an AI to predict whether or not people should get a mortgage? Anybody remember Stuxnet? Yeah, one of the first cyber weapons, right? Took a bunch of state actors to make it. And now you can make one in your bedroom with a little bit of spare time and some Python code and some Metasploit. So what's going to happen when people start training LLMs to write custom Stuxnets for free? By the way, there are currently AIs that you can rent for a couple Bitcoin that will help you write any number of intrusion packages. And if you want to think about whether or not this regulation thing is just a recent problem, this is actually the story about a guy who, back a long time ago, lost, I think, over $1 billion in bonds and bond trading. And it was the story of how, in a highly regulated industry that supposedly had a bunch of adults in the room, they were still able to get away with one of the largest losses in a bank ever. The IEEE, as it turns out, actually has a code of ethics. Did anybody else know that? Because I didn't. A couple people did. And then there's Reset Tech. This is specifically about the impact that other sites, I refuse to call it X, Twitter, Facebook, and any number of other sites have actually had on free and open societies in terms of fake news. If you think about a perfect example that's very timely, right now one of the biggest problems we have with the war that's going on is getting good information and timely information. There is more misinformation than better information. They actually have, they posit that without good information, you cannot actually have a true democracy. If you aren't informed, you aren't making an informed choice. So, I know this is a little depressing. That's why they always put me before the beer. There's a lot for us to think about. And it's not just the cool new thing that we're doing, even though that oftentimes the cool, shiny thing, that's why we got into this. It feels really great to make something work. It feels really good to basically be in control of a spinning triangle, a new OpenGL output, whatever it is, a piece of hardware. I mean, I don't know what it is. Every time I bring up a new board and I see a little LED blink, I'm like, yes, right? But as we make these tools and as we give them away freely and as we just sort of put them out into the world, I think it bears a little bit of our time and energy to consider what the implication and use of those tools are. Because if we don't, this is a potential picture of our future. Done one Git push at a time. That's what I've got for you. Thank you so much for your time and attention.
Great to leave us some food for thought. Any questions? As always, don't all speak at once.
Where to get a Xanax?
Yes.
Hello. First off, awesome talk. I've been thinking about a lot of the same things. I feel like we've read a lot of similar posts on the internet. So for the dual use problem, I feel like that's kind of the core of it, right? You can't make a hammer that people can't use to kill somebody.
Yep.
So then what? Like anything in this room, I could probably kill somebody with a little bit of creativity, which is what we're all good at. So what do I do? Like, how do I navigate that, like, difficulty of reality?
Good question. Great question. How do we navigate reality? First off, if you really do want to be able to kill people with anything in the room, watch all the John Wicks over and over and over again. So it's a really great question. I think one of the issues that and I wish I could remember the economists who thought about this, but a long time ago there was a talk I heard where these economists were talking about you could divvy up the world into different eras. Where in the Stone Age, two guys meet, they hit each other with stones, both of them are likely to get hurt. Then there was the Bronze Age, where all of a sudden two guys meet, one guy can take on more than one guy because you have bronze armor or a spear or a hoplite. Then the Age of Steel, blah, blah, blah. It goes through up until the armor, like the Mounted Knight, where all of a sudden you had about 20 to 1. Strangely, something very strange happened along the creation of the English longbow because armored knights were very expensive to make. Like buying a suit of armor cost like a house. The English longbow didn't. It was cheap. And all of a sudden, a dude with a very cheap piece of equipment could kill 20, 30 people in very little training. So I don't know what it is, but I do know the fact that once you had the Enola Gay where 13 people could drop one bomb and kill 50,000, and it's been going up since then, that the issue comes down to one of economics, right? And it's the cost of how cheap is it for somebody to do something which is untoward. You're absolutely right in a dual-use technology. But how many people would be comfortable with me having, I don't know, a $100 bioreactor, a copy of CRISPR, and the sequence for ricin? all of you should be freaking out right now. One, I don't know how I'm going to get through airport security if they ever hear this talk. And then two, that's where we're going, because the real issue that we run into is the economic costs go so low that it makes it very challenging to keep those hands out of bad actors. I don't know. But I know collectively, I think if we start thinking about it and we introduce that to the discussion, at least that discussion can be had. And I'm not advocating for removal of any of these technologies, by the way. I'm just advocating to make sure that we think about it as part of the responsibility we have for putting them out there.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question.
Thank you for a great talk. What do you think? I think that there is more good people that will use this technology for better things.
I think you're right. I think for the most part, technology is actually used to improve the world. I think this goes back to the same economic argument. The question is, strangely enough, there's a book called The Spirit Level: Why a Just Society is Better for Everyone. I think there might be a solution, or a better solution. I think that if we can include more people into the process, if we can include more people, and I don't just mean like the process of making technology, I mean actually benefiting from the technology that's made. I think actually benefiting from things. I think the more people that we can bring into that who are actively benefiting from doing the right thing and not destroying the world, even by accident, I think we'll be better off. You will never be able to make everything perfectly safe. A perfectly safe world is something where nothing happens. But I do believe the current world, where we have a winner-takes-all system, where it's zero-sum, where the game is literally I win, you lose, means less and less when you eventually can get a tool that says, oh, okay, how about this? Let's make it zero-sum, you lose, I lose, because I've got nothing to lose. We need to give people a reason to think about it as winning. And I think if there's one thing that the war in Ukraine has been able to tell us, it's that technology is the future of warfare and therefore the extension of politics, right? That means we in this room will be on that forefront.
Okay. Let's hear it for Randall Thomas. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time. Woo-hoo.